picture this, right? You're lying on your back on a really warm summer afternoon,
Sounds nice.
right? Just staring up at the sky, and a large, fluffy white cloud drifts overhead, and suddenly you see it.
Tuba.
It's a perfect rabbit. I mean, you can see the ears, the little cottontail, the slope of its nose. It is unmistakable.
Oh, yeah, the classic cloud shapes.
Exactly. Now, we all know logically that the cloud is just, a random mass of water vapor. It's entirely dictated by atmospheric pressure and wind currents and all that.
Pure chaos, essentially.
Pure chaos.
Yeah.
But your brain, it doesn't care. It sees a rabbit. And this is actually a really well-documented psychological phenomenon.
It is, yeah. Human beings are basically biologically hardwired to be these natural pattern finders.
Right. Our nervous system is just designed to look for order and chaos, and we are so incredibly good at it that we will visually manifest shapes, even when we, logically know those shapes are not real.
Yeah, our source material actually refers to this as the bunnies in the clouds effect.
The bunnies in the clouds effect, I love that. And, when you're just enjoying a sunny afternoon, it's a charming little quirk of human evolution. But, and this is the but what if you took that exact same biological instinct?
That desperate need for order.
Yeah, your brain's unrelenting need to find order in random chaos, and you applied it to, say, your life savings.
Oh, wow. That's a terrifying pivot.
It is, because what happens when you look at the jagged, totally unpredictable movements of the financial markets, and you see a pattern that isn't actually there, and then you bet your house on it.
Usually you lose the house.
Right. So today we're exploring why seeing patterns in market data isn't just some neat psychological trick. It's basically a blueprint for the systematic destruction of your capital. So welcome to the deep dive.
It's a really phenomenal place to start, honestly, because human nature is, well, it's fundamentally repulsed by the unpredictable. We just hate the unexplained.
I really do. It makes us anxious.
Exactly. So our cognitive machinery automatically steps in, right? It imposes meaning onto completely random sensory stimuli.
Just to make us feel safe?
Pretty much. So when you look at a chart of asset prices, say, I don't know, the daily movements of the S&P 500 over a year, you are looking at an incredibly noisy, vastly complex data set.
Just a wall of numbers and squiggles.
But because of this cognitive bias, which is known as representativeness-based reasoning, you will involuntarily assume that the chart you're looking at is the result of an ordered, purposeful process.
You can't help it. You will see a trend.
You'll see a trend, you'll see a wave, you'll see a geometric shape. You will literally convince yourself that the market is telling you a story.
Like the market has a personality and it's communicating with you.
Yes. But very often, what you are actually experiencing is nothing more than just the vagaries of chance at work. It is the visual equivalent of an optical illusion.
And dismantling that exact illusion it's basically our entire mission for this deep dive today.
And it's a big mission.
It is. We are going to figure out how to upgrade our thinking from this subjective, illusion-based guesswork to, well, rigorous, evidence-based knowledge.
We're zeroing in heavily on chapters 3 and 4 from the text today, right?
Exactly. Chapters 3 and 4. We need to explore the underlying architecture of how you actually test an idea to see if it holds water. So let's just jump straight into the deep end here.
Let's go.
The source text draws this massive, basically uncrossable line in the sand between two entirely different ways of looking at market data. On one side, subjective technical analysis, and on the other, objective technical analysis.
That line is crucial.
So what is the actual dividing line that causes the author to just completely reject the subjective approach?
Well, the dividing line really comes down to how a method is defined, right? And specifically, whether that definition leaves any room whatsoever for human interpretation.
Meaning, does it require an opinion?
Exactly. Subjective analysis is comprised of all these methods, chart patterns, concepts that are just vaguely defined.
Like what? What's an example?
Think about classical chart reading, drawing trend lines by hand on a screen, or applying really complex visual frameworks like the Elliott wave principle.
Oh, yeah, people love the Elliott wave.
They do. But because the definitions of these patterns are not perfectly rigid, applying them requires the private, internal interpretation of the individual analyst.
Which means, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you give the exact same historical chart to two different subjective analysts and you ask them to apply the exact same method, they could easily come to completely opposite conclusions.
Oh, happens all the time. One says it's a clear signal to buy, and the other says, no, it's an obvious signal to sell.
That's wild. So it's basically just guessing with extra steps.
It is. And that ambiguity, that's the absolute death knell for any claim of validity. Because subjective analysis relies on that private interpretation, it is inherently untestable.
Because you can't test a feeling.
Exactly. You cannot write a computer program to backtest a feeling or a private interpretation. And if a method cannot be rigidly tested against historical data, then any claim that the method is effective is completely insulated from empirical challenge.
The text refers to these as empty claims, right? Or pseudo-propositions.
Yes, pseudo-propositions.
Yeah.
They might sound like they contain this deep, mystical market knowledge, but they possess zero actual cognitive content.
They sound profound, but they're hollow.
Precisely hollow. Why? Because there is no discernible difference between evidence that affirms them and evidence that denies them.
Give me an example of that. How does that play out in real life?
Okay, so if a subjective analyst predicts a massive market crash based on some hand-drawn chart pattern,
Yeah.
right? And then the market goes straight up instead.
They were totally wrong.
You'd think so. But they can always just say, oh, I drew the line slightly wrong, or, oh, the pattern just morphed into a different, rarer variation.
Wow. So they always have an out.
Always. They can never be proven wrong. Objective analysis, on the other hand, lives and dies by what the text calls the programmability criterion.
The programmability criterion. I love that phrase. Basically, if you cannot code it, it does not exist.
That is the ultimate acid test, yes. A method is objective if, and literally only if, it can be implemented as a computer program that produces completely unambiguous market positions.
So it has to spit out a definitive sequence, like long, short, or neutral.
Exactly. No maybes, no, well, it looks like a pretty good setup. It must be reduced to a strict algorithm using mathematical and logical operators.
Like greater than or less than thresholds.
Right. You use those rigid thresholds to transform an input time series, the price data, into concrete, undeniable action.
Okay, I want to use an analogy here for Chapter 3 to really anchor this for the listener.
Go for it.
Let's think about building a trading algorithm like designing a new aerospace vehicle. We're going to use an aerospace wind tunnel as our anchor.
I like this.
So in the subjective world, you are basically sitting at a bar, and you're drawing a sleek-looking airplane on a cocktail
A
napkin.
literal napkin sketch.
Exactly. You show it to your colleague next to you and say, look at these lines, man. It looks incredibly aerodynamic. This thing will definitely fly.
And they agree because it looks cool.
Right. But you cannot take a napkin sketch, hand it to a factory, build it out of metal, stuff 200 passengers inside, and just hope for the best.
That would be criminal negligence.
It really would be. But that is the exact equivalent of subjective trading. You're betting your retirement on a napkin sketch.
It's a great way to put it.
So to move into the realm of objective analysis, you have to build a physical, exact mathematical model. You must define the precise geometry of every single curve of the wing.
Every single millimeter.
Yes, that is the programmability criterion in action. And once you have that perfectly rigid model, you place it inside the wind tunnel and you blast it with a predefined massive speed of air.
And that blast of air, in our world, is your historical data backtest.
Exactly. And here's the crucial part. The entire point of the wind tunnel isn't to joyously stand there and watch the plane fly.
No, not at all.
It is to crank up the air pressure to the absolute maximum and see if the wings rip off.
You're trying to destroy it. And honestly, the transition from that easy napkin sketch to the mathematically rigid model in the wind tunnel, it is excruciatingly difficult.
I can imagine.
And that difficulty is exactly why so many analysts just prefer to stay in the realm of the napkin. It is cozy there. You don't have to face the music.
It's much easier to just draw lines.
Right. And to illustrate just how hard it is to define that mathematical geometry, the text details an attempt to objectify one of the most famous subjective patterns in all of finance.
Oh, the head and shoulders pattern.
Yes, the infamous head and shoulders.
If you're listening and you have ever looked at a stock chart, you have probably heard of this one. In subjective analysis, every beginner looks at a squiggly line and sees, a left shoulder, a higher peak for a head, and then a lower right shoulder.
It forms a little silhouette of a person.
It does. It is the ultimate bunny in the cloud.
It really is. Now, in a textbook diagram, a head and shoulders is drawn as this sequence of perfectly clean, smooth, entirely noise-free price swings.
Which never happens in reality.
Never. In the real world, actual asset prices do not trace out clean peaks and troughs.
Wow.
The market is plagued by a mathematical property called fractal scaling.
Let me just make sure we're totally clear on fractal scaling, because it's important. This means that if you look at a yearly chart, you see these large, sweeping waves.
Right.
But if you zoom in on just one of those big waves and look at a monthly chart, you see smaller waves embedded inside it.
Yes, exactly.
Then if you zoom in on a weekly chart, there are even smaller, choppier waves inside those. It is basically an endless Russian nesting doll of jagged price movements.
That is a perfect visualization. The Russian nesting doll of noise. So these subjective analysts, they just use their human eye to visually smooth out all that fractal noise.
They just kind of blur their vision until they see the big pattern.
Right, they find the overarching shape. But a computer does not have human eye. It can't just blur its vision.
No, it just sees data points.
Exactly. So to put the Head and Shoulders into our objective wind tunnel, we have to defeat that fractal scaling mathematically.
Which sounds incredibly complicated.
It is. The text highlights this fascinating study by two researchers named C and O, and they attempted to finally program this exact pattern.
They tried to build the geometry.
Yes. And they couldn't just tell the computer, hey, look for 3 peaks. That means nothing. They had to build an exhaustive, totally rigid set of geometric constraints.
And the very first hurdle there is just defining what a peak actually is, right?
Just defining a peak is a nightmare.
Because if the price goes up for 3 days, then drops for 1 day, and goes up for 2 more, is that 1 peak or is that 2 peaks?
To a computer, those are 2 distinct peaks, unless you tell it otherwise. So to solve this, they had to apply something called an Alexander filter.
Or a zigzag filter, right?
Yeah, zigzag filter.
Yeah.
You have to set a strict mathematical threshold. For example, a 10% price reversal.
Okay, so how does that filter actually work?
It means the computer is literally not allowed to recognize a peak until the price has retraced a full 10% from the absolute highest high.
Oh, wow. So if it only drops 4%, the computer just ignores it and keeps looking higher.
Exactly. It filters out all the tiny fractal noise and leaves you with only the major undeniable swing points.
But getting the peaks, that's just the beginning, isn't it?
Oh, it's barely the starting line. It gets so much worse.
Walk me through it.
Okay, so once you have mathematically identified the peaks and troughs, let's just label them points A, B, C, D, and E.
Got it. 5 points.
You now need strict rules to exclude all the random market noise that kind of looks like a Head and Shoulders, but mathematically isn't.
Right, the false positives.
First, the researchers had to implement vertical symmetry rules. These rules ensure that the neckline of the pattern, which is the line connecting the bottom troughs, isn't too steeply sloped.
Because if the right shoulder forms like way down at the bottom of the chart compared to the left shoulder, it might technically be 3 peaks, but it's fundamentally a totally different market structure.
Exactly. It's not a Head and Shoulders anymore. It's a downtrend. So they define this mathematically by comparing the price levels of the shoulders and troughs to the midpoints of the segments connecting them.
That's serious geometry.
They established a precise parameter for the maximum allowable slope. And if the calculated slope exceeds that parameter by even a fraction of a percent,
Let me guess, the computer objectively disqualifies the pattern.
thrown out entirely. Next, they had to implement horizontal symmetry rules.
Okay, so vertical is the slope, horizontal deals with the width of the pattern.
Right, because you can't have a left shoulder that takes, 3 days to form, and then a head that takes 4 years to form.
It totally ruins the shape. It looks ridiculous.
The time distance from the left shoulder to the head must be relatively proportionate to the time distance from the head to the right shoulder.
How do you code relatively proportionate?
You set a strict multiplier rule. They dictated that the temporal distance of one shoulder to the head cannot be greater than 2.5 times the distance of the other shoulder to the head.
So if it takes 10 days for the left shoulder, the right shoulder can't take more than 25 days.
Precisely. If it's 2.6 times greater, the pattern is thrown out.
Man, the constraints are brutal.
And we aren't done. Finally, they had to add a pattern completion rule.
Because the whole point of a Head and Shoulders is that it's supposed to signal a massive drop when the price breaks below that neckline.
That's the subjective theory, yes.
But if it takes a literal decade for the price to finally cross that line after the right shoulder forms, the pattern is totally irrelevant. The market has moved on.
Exactly. So they dictated that the maximum time allowed for the price to penetrate the neckline after the right shoulder is formed must be strictly less than the total time it took to form the two shoulders combined.
Oh, that's clever. It forces a time limit on the trade.
It does. Now, look at the sheer volume of constraints we just discussed.
It's massive.
The zigzag filter, the vertical symmetry, the horizontal symmetry, the time completion limits. This is the exhaustive painstaking labor required to convert a subjective napkin sketch into an objective model ready for the wind tunnel.
Okay, so let's put ourselves in the analyst's seat for a second.
Right.
Let's say I have done all of that agonizing work. I mean, I defeated fractal scaling. I programmed the vertical and horizontal symmetry perfectly. My geometric model is absolutely flawless.
You've built a masterpiece.
I did. I put it into the wind tunnel, I flipped the switch, and I blast it with 20 years of historical backtest data.
Max pressure.
Max pressure.
Yeah.
And the computer spits out a report showing that my perfectly defined head and shoulders rule just made an absolute fortune over the last 2 decades.
They crushed the market.
Right. So the overwhelming human urge is to jump out of my chair and say, I did it. I discovered gravity. I proved that my rule is a universal law of the market.
Of course you feel that way.
But that is a trap, isn't it?
It is the ultimate trap. And it's where the vast, vast majority of technical analysts completely destroy themselves.
Why? If the backtest is profitable, didn't it survive the wind tunnel?
It survived, yes. But the assumption that a successful historical backtest proves a rule has genuine predictive power. That requires a massive, fundamentally flawed leap in logic.
A leap we can't make.
No, it is a leap that the scientific method explicitly forbids.
Okay, this is where we really have to look under the hood of the wind tunnel.
Let's do it.
Because the wind tunnel isn't just a machine that blows air, right? It runs on a very specific operating system. And we need to understand the logic of that operating system. Otherwise, we are literally just playing with data and calling it science.
That's incredibly well said. The operating system of objective research is known as the hypothetico-deductive method.
The hypothetico-deductive method, try saying that 5 times fast.
Right. It is the engine of your wind tunnel, and it consists of 5 very rigorous stages.
Observation, hypothesis, prediction, verification, and conclusion.
You got it.
Let's walk through these because this is literally the difference between a professional researcher and like an amateur data miner.
Okay, stage 1 is observation. You notice something interesting in the market data. Perhaps you observe a recurring sequence of price movements that seem to precede a breakout.
So I just see something quirky in the charts.
Exactly. Stage 2 is the hypothesis. Based on a mixture of your observation, your own insight, maybe prior knowledge of market dynamics, you propose that this sequence isn't just a historical artifact, but a recurring phenomenon that will continue to hold true in the future.
So this is the exact moment I formalize my trading algorithm.
Yes, you write the code. Then, stage 3 is the critical pivot, prediction. You deduce a logical prediction from your hypothesis.
What does that look like in practice?
This prediction must dictate exactly what should be observed in a completely new, untested set of data if your hypothesis is actually true.
If my rule works, it will make money on this data set.
Basically. Stage 4 is verification, which is the physical execution of your backtest against that historical data, the blast of wind.
And then the final stage.
Stage 5 is the conclusion, where you make an inference based on how well the results of the backtest matched your initial prediction.
But the conclusion stage is where everything falls apart for most people, right?
It's where all the logic gets totally mangled.
To really grasp why my wildly profitable backtest doesn't actually prove anything, we have to get into the underlying logic. We have to talk about conditional syllogisms.
Oh, we are going deep into philosophy now.
We have to.
A conditional syllogism is the fundamental structure of a scientific argument. It is composed of 3 parts, 2 premises and a conclusion.
Okay, walk me through the parts.
The first premise is a conditional statement, usually framed as, if P, then Q. The antecedent clause is P, and the consequent clause is Q.
Let's anchor that in our actual trading reality so we don't lose the listener in the algebra.
Good idea.
So P is my hypothesis. My trading rule has genuine predictive power. And Q is my prediction. My backtest will be highly profitable.
Yes. So the first premise is, if my trading rule have predictive power, then my backtest will be profitable. If P, then Q.
Makes perfect sense so far. Now let's look at the universally common yet completely invalid way to process this logic. It is a logical error known as the fallacy of affirming the consequent.
Affirming the consequent. How does the fallacy go?
It goes like this. If P is true, then Q is true. We observe that Q is indeed true. Therefore, P must be true.
Okay, let me translate that back to trading. If my rule has predictive power, my backtest will be profitable. I ran the backtest, and look at this equity curve. It is massively profitable. Therefore, my rule absolutely has predictive power.
That's exactly how people think.
And when you say it out loud, it sounds so perfectly rational to the human brain. Why is this disastrously wrong?
Because it completely ignores alternate explanations.
Alternate explanations?
Yes, the fact that your backtest was profitable, the observation of Q, is certainly consistent with your rule having predictive power, but it is not sufficient to prove it. Why not?
Because the backtest might be profitable purely by random chance. The market could have just been in a massive 10-year bull run that just happened to align with your completely random buy signals.
Oh, it makes me think of the classic logic puzzle about the sprinkler.
Yes, the wet lawn analogy. Let's hear it.
Okay, so if I say, if it is raining outside, my lawn will be wet. That is a logically true statement. P leads to Q.
Undeniably true.
Then I wake up, I look out the window, and I observe, my lawn is wet. Q is true. If I automatically conclude, therefore it must be raining, I have committed the fallacy.
You affirm the consequence.
I have ignored the very real possibility that my automatic sprinkler system just turned on overnight.
Exactly. The wet lawn is confirmatory evidence, yes, but it is not undeniable proof of rain.
That's such a perfect way to visualize it.
Confirmatory instances do not provide certitude. You cannot prove a hypothesis true just by accumulating a massive pile of profitable backtests.
Just like you can't prove it's raining just by finding a bunch of wet lawns in the neighborhood.
Exactly. The deductive logic simply does not hold up. And this realization, this was the great contribution of the philosopher Karl Popper to the scientific method.
Karl Popper, what did he figure out?
Popper realized that while you cannot deductively prove a hypothesis true by confirming the consequent, you absolutely can prove a hypothesis false by denying the consequent.
Denying the consequent. So instead of looking for wet lawns, we are looking for a dry lawn during a rainstorm.
Basically, yes. The valid logical argument is like this. If P is true, then Q is true. We observe that Q is not true, therefore P is not true.
Okay, let's apply it back to my algorithm.
Sure. If my trading rule has predictive power, the backtest will not lose money. We observe that the backtest lost a massive amount of money, therefore my rule has no predictive power.
The wings ripped off in the wind tunnel.
They completely sheared off. The model shattered.
Wow. So the observation directly contradicts the prediction, so the hypothesis is definitively falsified.
Yes. Science does not exist to prove things true. It exists to prove things false.
You know, I want to pause here for a second and just reflect on the psychological weight of what you're saying.
It's heavy.
It is. This means that all scientific knowledge, and by extension, all objective trading knowledge, is inherently provisional. It's temporary.
Totally provisional.
If you are listening to this and you build models for a living, think about the ego check required here. You don't get to go into your research lab, build a brilliant new algorithm, and look for evidence to prove yourself right.
No, that's the amateur way.
You have to step into that lab, build your absolute masterpiece, put it in the wind tunnel, crank the pressure up to maximum, and actively try to destroy your own creation.
You have to try and kill your own babies, intellectually speaking.
And if the wings don't rip off, it actually survives the backtest. You don't get to call a press conference and announce the universal truth.
Yep.
You just get to quietly say, well, it survived today. It gets to live another day.
That takes immense intellectual humility.
It demands total intellectual honesty. You must abandon the comforting search for absolute certainty, which we all want, and accept that you are dealing with provisional knowledge.
A model that hasn't been falsified yet is simply the best working theory we have at this specific moment in time.
So we've figured out how to build a rigorous model. We know we must subject it to the wind tunnel.
Right.
And we understand the logic. We cannot fall into the trap of affirming the consequent, and we must actively seek to falsify our ideas.
That's chapter 3 in a nutshell.
But that leaves us with a glaring, really messy real-world problem, and this is going to perfectly transition us to chapter 4.
I know exactly where you're going with this.
In the physical sciences, things break cleanly. The wings either stay on the plane or they shear off. The plane flies or it crashes.
Binary outcomes.
But in the financial markets, a backtest rarely loses money cleanly and it rarely makes money perfectly.
Almost never.
What happens when my rule generates a 4% annualized return over 10 years?
A very mediocre, noisy return.
Exactly. How do we know if that modest 4% positive return is a genuine signal that survived the wind tunnel, or if it was just a fluke gust of wind?
Logic alone cannot answer this.
Logic gives us the structure of the argument, but it cannot quantify the noise.
And that is exactly where the limits of deductive logic are reached. Logic is binary, like you said. It deals with true and
The
false.
market data isn't true or false.
No, market data is noisy, it's chaotic, and it's probabilistic. To answer your question, to actually quantify the element of luck, we must look at the data through an entirely different lens.
Which means we are stepping into Chapter 4. We must use statistical analysis.
Yes, the source text defines statistics as the science of data.
The science of data. And it makes a very clear point about when statistical analysis is actually necessary because, and this surprised me, you don't always need it.
No, you don't. Statistical methods are exclusively needed when the implications of your data are uncertain.
Okay, give me an example of when it's certain.
Well, if your newly programmed trading rule works 100% of the time, right, making $1 million a day for 5 straight years without a single losing trade or a moment of drawdown, you do not need statistics to tell you it works.
Right. If that happens, I don't need to hire a statistician. I need to hire an armored truck to take me to the bank vault.
Exactly. You just have a money printer.
Yeah.
But in the financial markets, results are never, ever that definitive.
They're always a mix of wins and losses.
Always. You might have a rule that makes money 54% of the time and loses 46% of the time, generating this choppy but ultimately positive return.
And because that result is hopelessly tangled up with the inherent daily randomness of the market, the implications of that 54% win rate are highly uncertain.
Very uncertain. You need a mathematical framework to separate the genuine predictive edge, the alpha, from the random noise.
Okay, so how do we start?
To do that, statistical inference begins with a foundational, deeply pessimistic premise called the null hypothesis.
The null hypothesis, which in the text is mathematically denoted as H0.
Yes, H sub 0. In the specific context of testing a trading rule, the null hypothesis is the baseline assumption that your brilliant, beautiful algorithm is completely, utterly worthless.
Wow. It just assumes I'm wrong from the jump.
It assumes your rule possesses zero predictive power whatsoever, and therefore, its expected true return going forward is exactly zero, or even less.
It is the ultimate skeptic in the room.
A biggest skeptic.
You walk in with your back test, all proud, and the null hypothesis crosses its arms and says, your rule is garbage. I assume it is garbage until you mathematically force me to believe otherwise.
Precisely. It sets up the burden of proof. Your historical backtest must produce a return so high and so completely improbable under the assumption of the null hypothesis that you are logically forced to reject the null.
You have to make the skeptic tap out.
Right. You conclude that your rule actually possesses a real edge.
Okay, to make this incredibly abstract concept of statistical inference concrete for the listener, let's step away from the wind tunnel.
We need a new analogy.
We do. We are going to introduce a new anchor for this half of the deep dive.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine you are standing in a vast, empty warehouse, and right in front of you is a massive, almost infinitely large box.
A giant box.
Let's call it the box of beads.
The box of beads is a classic, highly effective way to visualize probability.
Let's say inside this warehouse-sized box are millions upon millions of beads. These beads represent the daily returns of your trading rule, stretching out indefinitely into the future.
Okay, I'm visualizing it.
Some of the beads are red. These represent profitable trading days. Some of the beads are gray. These represent losing trading days.
Right. The true ratio of red beads to gray beads inside that entire massive box is what statisticians refer to as the population parameter.
The population parameter.
Yes. If 60% of the millions of beads in the entire box are red, then your trading rule has a genuine, undeniable predictive edge. You will make money long term.
But if the box is split perfectly 50-50 between red and gray,
then your rule is mathematically worthless. It is no better than a coin flip.
But here is the massive catch. The box is too big, and its contents stretch out into the immediate practical future. We are completely blind to the full contents of the box.
We can't count millions of beads.
We cannot look at all the beads. We are only allowed to reach our hand into the box blindfolded and scoop out a small handful of beads.
Just one scoop.
Let's say our scoop holds exactly 20 beads. That single scoop represents our historical backtest sample.
Correct. The 20 beads in your hand are your finite sample. It is literally the only observable data you have in this scenario.
Okay, so I reach into the massive box, I pull out my scoop, I take off my blindfold, and I count the beads in my hand.
What did you get?
I have 12 red beads and 8 gray beads. That is a 60% win rate in my hand.
Seems pretty good.
The ultimate question of statistics is, does that scoop of 12 red and 8 gray mean that the entire massive warehouse box is mostly red? Or did I just reach into a box that is actually perfectly split 50-50 and I just happen to get a really lucky scoop?
And that, right there, is the fundamental crisis of statistical inference. You are trying to infer the absolute truth about the whole box, the population, based solely on the limited evidence of your one tiny scoop, the sample.
And human intuition just completely fails us here, doesn't it?
It totally fails us. Because if the massive box is truly 50-50, getting 12 red beads in a tiny scoop of 20 is actually quite common just by random chance. It's not a miracle.
Hold on, let me think about this. Because that doesn't completely make sense to me intuitively.
Why not?
Well, in a physical warehouse with a physical box of beads, if I wanted to know if my first scoop of 12 red beads was just a lucky fluke, I wouldn't stand there agonizing over advanced math.
What would you do?
I would just throw the 20 beads back into the box, mix it all up, and take another scoop.
That's a very practical approach.
Right. I could spend all afternoon taking 50 different scoops, recording the results of each one on a clipboard, and just seeing what the average scoop looks like.
You build an empirical distribution.
Exactly. If I keep getting 12 red beads over and over and over, I know the box is mostly red. But, and here's the kicker, in the financial markets, we only have one timeline.
Ah, yes. The timeline problem.
I can't go back to January 1st, 1980 and run the S&P 500 again to see what my rule would do in an alternate reality.
History only happens once.
I can only take one scoop. So how on earth are we supposed to measure the probability of luck when we only get one single try?
You have just perfectly articulated the exact mathematical wall that early 20th century statisticians slammed into. It is the one scoop problem.
The one scoop problem, it seems unsolvable.
Because you only have one historical timeline, one back-tested mean return, you have absolutely zero context for how much that specific return might just be randomly varying from the underlying truth. You are blind.
So how do we solve it? If we can't get more data from the market, what do we do?
To solve it, we have to move past the conceptual analogies and get into the hard structural execution of statistical testing.
Okay, brace yourselves.
We have to analyze the three distinct mathematical distributions that make inference possible. This is highly technical terrain, but it is the absolute bedrock of evidence-based analysis.
Okay, let's build this out step by step so we don't lose anyone. If I am following the logic, the first distribution must be the massive box itself.
Yes. The first is the population data distribution. Returning to our warehouse analogy, this is the entire, practically infinite box of beads.
Everything that could ever happen.
Right. It consists of an infinite number of daily returns for your trading rule, stretching out into the immediate practical future. It represents all the possible random realizations of market behavior over a finite future timeline.
It is the absolute ground truth reality of my rule's predictive power.
But crucially, it is entirely unobservable.
The unobservable truth. Got it. Then the second distribution must be the scoop in my hand.
Correct. The second is the sample data distribution. This is your single historical backtest.
My one timeline.
Yes. If you tested your algorithm over a 10-year period, this distribution is simply the specific observable daily returns you experienced over those roughly 2,500 trading days.
It is the 12 red and 8 gray beads I am physically holding.
Exactly. It is entirely observable, but it is deeply limited because it only tells you what did happen, not what will happen.
Which brings us to the third distribution. And this one has to basically bridge the gap between the scoop in my hand and the unobservable box.
It does. The third is the sampling distribution. And if there is one concept the listener needs to completely internalize from this entire deep dive, it is this one.
All right, let's break it down.
The sampling distribution is a theoretical construct. It is the distribution of your sample statistic, in this case, your rule's mean return, if you were somehow able to take an infinite number of separate samples.
Okay, let me visualize this. If I could magically stand at the box of beads and take infinite independent scoops, calculate the average return of each scoop, and then plot all of those thousands of averages on a massive graph, I would be creating the sampling distribution.
That's exactly it. And the shape that this graph takes is incredibly important.
What shape does it take?
It takes the shape of a probability density function, or a PDF. For a trading rule, where we are testing the null hypothesis, this distribution typically forms the shape of a classic bell curve.
Okay, a bell curve. And where is it centered?
It is centered perfectly on 0.
It is centered on 0 because the null hypothesis, our ultimate skeptic, assumes our rule has exactly 0 predictive power.
Right. You're plotting pure chance around zero.
Okay, visualize this bell curve with us. The total area underneath this curve equals 1.0, which represents 100% probability.
Yes.
The height of the curve at any given point along the horizontal axis represents the relative frequency of that specific average return occurring by pure chance.
Correct. The peak of the bell curve is right at zero, meaning a 0% return is the most common, most likely outcome for a worthless rule.
And as you move further to the right along the axis into higher and higher positive returns, the curve slopes downward toward the floor.
Which visually represents that higher returns are increasingly rare. But, and this is key, they are still mathematically possible purely by luck.
And because the total area under the curve is exactly 1.0, we can use the fractional area of the curve to determine exact probabilities.
That is the magic key to all of this. Let's say your single historical backtest, your one physical scoop of data, produced an annualized positive return of 8%.
Okay, an 8% return.
You locate the 8% mark on the horizontal axis of this theoretical sampling distribution. You draw a vertical line straight up until it hits the slope of the bell curve.
Okay, I've got the line.
Then you calculate the area under the curve to the right of that line, all the way into the extreme tail. Let's say that fractional area represents 0.04 or 4% of the total area.
That 4% is our p-value, isn't it?
It is exactly the t-value.
What does that number actually mean in plain English for the analysts staring at their computer screen?
In plain English, the p-value means this. If your trading rule truly has zero predictive power, if the massive box of beads is truly a 50-50 split of noise, there is only a 4% probability that you would manage to grab a scoop, yielding an 8% return or higher, just by random luck.
Oh, wow. So it's measuring the unlikelihood of the result under the assumption of noise.
Exactly.
And if that probability is low enough, we say the result is statistically significant, we reject the null hypothesis.
We tell the skeptic to go home.
Right. We look at that 4% and we say, it is so highly unlikely that this 8% return was just a fluke gust of wind in the tunnel. I am logically forced to conclude that my rule actually works. The aerodynamics are real.
You have grasped the exact mechanism of statistical significance.
But I feel like there's a but coming.
There is a huge but. This brings us right back to the wall you hit earlier.
It's the one scoop problem.
Yes. This entire elegant mathematical framework relies on the sampling distribution, the bell curve. But the bell curve is a theoretical construct built on the idea of infinite scoops.
And we only have one historical sample of market data. We only have one scoop.
Exactly. How on earth do we build a curve of infinite possibilities when we only have one timeline of history?
This is where we get to the execution breakthrough. I love this part of the book.
It's brilliant.
If we cannot go out and gather more historical data because time only moves in one direction, we have to find a way to manipulate the data we already have.
And the modern, computationally intense method for doing this is called resampling.
Resampling?
Yes. Decades ago, statisticians had to rely on classical, analytical math complex formulas with a lot of rigid, often flawed assumptions about market normality just to estimate the shape of this curve.
Because they didn't have computers.
Right. Today, we don't need assumptions. We use raw computational power.
We just brute force it.
We do. The text discusses two primary methods, bootstrapping and Monte Carlo permutation. Both of these methods rely on using a computer to randomly resample your single original historical data set over and over again,
simulating thousands of different alternate histories. I really want to focus deeply on the Monte Carlo permutation method here, because when I was reading the source material, the mechanics of how this specific simulation forces the null hypothesis into physical existence just blew my mind.
It is a beautiful piece of logic.
Walk us through how the computer actually executes this, step by step.
Okay. The Monte Carlo permutation method builds the sampling distribution of luck by actively destroying any real predictive relationship between your trading rule and the market.
It physically severs the tie.
It completely cuts the cord. Here's how the algorithm executes it. First, the computer takes the exact chronological sequence of historical daily price changes from your backtest.
Okay.
Let's say you tested on 5,000 days of the S&P 500. It takes those 5,000 daily returns and puts them into a virtual bin.
Okay, I am picturing a massive virtual bucket filled with 5,000 individual daily market returns ranging from, a plus 1% day to a minus 2% day.
Perfect. Second, the computer takes the exact chronological sequence of your algorithm's historical buy and sell signals over that exact same 5,000-day period.
So I have a list of 5,000 signals represented as +1 for long, -1 for short, or 0 for neutral.
Yes. Now, here's where the randomization happens. The computer shakes up the virtual bin of market returns, totally, completely scrambling their chronological order.
So they are completely out of sync with time.
Totally jumbled.
Yeah.
Then it reaches into the scrambled bin, draws one single market return at random, and pairs it with the first rule signal on your static list.
Wait, so my algorithm signal from January 4th, 1995 might get randomly paired with the market's actual return from like August 12th, 2003?
Exactly, and it performs this pairing without replacement, meaning it doesn't put that August 2003 return back in the bin.
So it just keeps drawing.
It keeps drawing randomly from the scrambled bin until all 5,000 of your algorithm's original signals are paired with a completely jumbled, out-of-order market return.
Wait, let me just sit with that for a second.
Take your time.
If you are listening to this, think about what is happening here. By completely scrambling the timeline of the market returns but keeping our signals static, we're actively turning our meticulously crafted trading rule into a blindfolded dart thrower.
That is exactly what you are doing. What is the philosophical point of this?
Tell me.
By severing the chronological link, you ensure that your rule cannot possibly have any real predictive power over the market data it is now paired with.
Because it's literally reacting to the wrong days.
Exactly. Any return generated by this newly scrambled timeline is, by absolute mathematical definition, pure, unadulterated noise.
It is the null hypothesis made manifest. We have forced it to exist.
We mathematically force the rule to be worthless, so we calculate the total return of that one perfectly scrambled timeline, and that gives us one single data point.
One lucky scoop of pure noise.
Yes. Then the computer does it again.
It reshuffles.
It takes all 5,000 returns, throws them back in the bin, shakes it up, randomly pairs them with your 5,000 signals again, and calculates the total return of the second scrambled timeline.
So that's 2 data points of noise.
And it does this again and again. It might run this permutation 5,000 or 10,000 separate times.
Wow.
By the end of the simulation, you have an array of 5,000 different average returns. But every single one of those returns was generated by a blindfolded, worthless version of your rule.
And if we plot those 5,000 random returns on a graph, we have built our bell curve.
You've built it.
We didn't have to use theoretical math or just lazily assume the market is normally distributed. We used the actual historical data, scrambled it to remove the signal, and built the exact sampling distribution of luck.
You have painstakingly built the benchmark of randomness. Now the grand finale.
I'm ready.
The final step of the evaluation. You take the actual real return that your algorithm generated in its true, chronologically unshuffled historical backtest.
Let's say it was that 8% annualized return from earlier.
Right. You take that 8% and you plot it as a single point on your newly generated Monte Carlo bell curve.
Okay, I plot the point.
If your unshuffled 8% return sits way out in the extreme right tail of the curve, completely isolated and far outside the massive cluster of scrambled returns, what does that tell you?
It tells me that the chronological order of my signals matter.
Yes.
It tells me that when my algorithm said buy on a Tuesday, the market actually went up on Wednesday. And it did so with a consistency that is mathematically impossible to replicate just by randomly scrambling the dates.
It wasn't just noise.
I have officially, empirically falsified the null hypothesis. I have sifted through the chaos and found a genuine signal in the noise.
And that right there is the absolute essence of evidence-based technical analysis.
It's so powerful.
It really is.
Yeah.
You defined your idea objectively.
Yeah.
You built a rigid mathematical model and put it in the wind tunnel.
Right.
And then, rather than just blindly trusting the backtest and falling for the fallacy of affirming the consequent, you used computer-intensive resampling the Monte Carlo permutation to conclusively prove that the wings didn't stay on just because of a lucky draft of air.
You prove the aerodynamics are real.
You proved it with data, not feelings.
This represents a profound, basically paradigm-altering shift in how we approach market knowledge and really how we approach truth itself.
It changes everything about how you research.
Let's recap the journey here. We started this deep dive exploring the bunnies in the clouds effect. We unpacked the harsh reality that if we want to survive in the markets, we must abandon subjective napkin sketches.
The programmability criterion is non-negotiable.
We learned that we have to define our ideas with uncompromising, rigid mathematical geometry, doing that grueling work of defeating fractal scaling with zigzag filters and strict symmetry rules.
All just to earn the right to get our models into the wind tunnel.
Exactly. And from there, we learned that the wind tunnel itself is dangerous if you don't understand the logic of falsification.
Right. A successful backtest doesn't prove universal truth. It only means you haven't managed to break your model yet.
You must constantly guard against the psychological comfort of confirming your own biases, recognizing that all objective knowledge is inherently provisional.
We always have to be our own harshest critics.
And finally, we tackled the box of beads. We learned that to truly evaluate the messy, probabilistic results of our wind tunnel, we have to confront the one-scoop problem.
Which Monte Carlo solves brilliantly.
It does. We use the computational brute force of Monte Carlo permutations to literally scramble history, build a probability density function of pure luck, and mathematically isolate our genuine predictive alpha from the random chaos of the universe.
It is an incredibly demanding, mathematically rigorous process. It requires technical skill and deep intellectual humility.
It really does.
But it is the only rational way to extract genuinely useful knowledge from financial data. It charts a safe, objective course between the gullibility of a subjective true believer who sees patterns in every cloud.
And the relentless, paralyzing doubt of someone who believes the market is entirely a random walk.
Exactly. It's the middle path of evidence.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the architecture of objective truth. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought.
Leave them with something to chew on.
We have spent the last hour dissecting how the human mind naturally, almost desperately, assumes the successful past result guarantees a successful future.
The human bias is strong.
We explore the fallacy of affirming the consequent, and we've seen how catastrophic that logic is when applied to financial markets. But I want you to step back and apply this exact same framework to your own life.
Oh, expanding the scope.
Think about your business, your technical career, or just your daily decision-making. Where else in your life are you mistaking a lucky scoop of beads for a permanent law of physics?
That's a great question.
Just because you executed one successful project, made one brilliant hire, or launched one strategy that paid off massively, are you assuming your methodology is flawless?
Are you affirming the consequent?
Are you building a career on that logical fallacy? Are you actively putting your own best ideas into a wind tunnel and trying with all your might to falsify them?
It's hard to do.
It is hard. Or are you just lying on the grass, looking up at the sky, happily finding bunnies in the clouds?
A provocative question, and one that every true professional must constantly ask themselves.
Thank you for joining us on this intensely technical deep dive. Keep questioning your assumptions, keep rigorously testing your ideas, and we will see you on the next one.